Well, hello. I am David McKenzie, the CEO of Psyched4, and I'm really excited to be joined by two of our advisory board members today. Obviously, you'll have seen in the news a lot of speculation around a potential merger between Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Global. And I thought, considering two of our advisory board members are extremely experienced in both of these companies, it would be a pretty interesting chat and enlightening to talk about what this potential merger could mean. So, to give both of them the proper introduction that they deserve, first of all, I'm joined by Stu Snyder. Stu was previously with Turner, where he was the COO and was actually at one point the head of Cartoon Network alongside other properties. And I'm also joined by Doug Herzog, who was the head of the MTV networks, which included such things as MTV, Comedy Central, Spike TV, and obviously both of them working in what is now Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount was CBS, Viacom CBS, I should say, and Turner. But I thought it'd be a really interesting conversation. So, Stu, Doug, always good to speak to you. How are you both?
Oh, we're good. I'm good. How
Doing
are you?
well. I'm doing okay. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, doing well.
And so, look, I think it's really interesting when I saw this. Obviously, these are two entertainment behemoths that I guess together would create an even larger behemoth that I can only think is probably being primed to try and help with the ongoing competition with Netflix. And to be honest, I think it maybe wasn't a huge surprise that Paramount was lining itself up for a sale. Obviously, I noticed that they put Simon and Schuster up for sale. They just sold Bellator to the Professional Fighters League, which they owned. But did this come as a surprise to either of you to see this potential merger as a discussion?
Not really.
Oh,
Yeah. Given everything that's going on, everybody,
yeah.
the companies, the legacy media companies, so Warner, Paramount, Comcast, Sony, Fox, they all need solutions to their myriad of problems. And so, getting married could be one of them. We'll see.
Yeah, the new economics of the industry is creating a lot of changes. And I think Netflix, as you mentioned, David, is only one factor in why these things are happening. I think it really is the distribution model changing, the dollars involved that are being traded, and how do you get the most efficiencies. We saw the trade with NBC getting bought by Comcast a few years ago. We saw Fox now being together with Disney. I mean, you see these things happening more and more, and it's how do they get more value out of what they have. So I think the economics is creating a lot of change.
And the root of it is cord cutting, right? So so for all these companies, certainly Turner, Paramount, Comcast. I mean, all the TV businesses, the linear TV businesses of all these, maybe outside of sort of Sony, who wasn't in the network or platform business. That's that's what sort of made these companies strong over the years. The studios, the movie studios, and the movie business would fluctuate, right? But they always had the backup and the strength and the foundation of really strong advertiser supported and in certain cases subscription and or cable operator fees versus like an HBO or Showtime. They have these great businesses to keep their studios kind of solvent and afloat. And it's an iceberg. These linear TV networks every one of them is worth less tomorrow than they will be today, and there's no end in sight. That I don't believe that turns around.
And history is really an important element here, because the industry has seen a few of these changes. I call them these dynamic changes. The first was when the home video business went away. The home video business held up the feature film business. You could have a movie that you can either release or not release in theaters, but you had this dynamic, rich, billion-dollar industry of home video. That changed, but what propped that business up was, as Doug said, the cable business. And now we see this monumental melting iceberg of the cable industry, and the dollars are not being replaced dollar for dollar we're seeing it in the streaming business, and the theatrical business is going through its now sea change on what do you do with feature films, and how do you get them made, and then how do you get them released to a place where they're profitable.
Yeah, they're in a very tough place because they have, they all are firmly rooted. They remain firmly rooted in the linear business, right? And they're going to run those
As long as possible.
as long as they're going to run them into the ground. They're just going
Right.
to they're going to milk every dollar they can out of them, which is why the cable channels are now filled with reruns and not original programming. They put all the original programming on their streaming services, which are, for the most part, losing money.
Losing money.
And they're sort of stuck in between. Sony seems in retrospect to have played it pretty smart by, not, being tempted to get into this business and remaining a studio and a content supplier and an arms dealer to a certain degree. So they chose a lane. Netflix is the best example. They came in, they sort of invented the streaming business, and that's the lane they have remained in, and they just build strength on strength, and they're going to be very tough to catch up with. It doesn't matter who you are. And they'll always have a little bit of advantage because they are streaming natives versus, the content companies who are trying to, sort of convert, which is.
And as we were just discussing, even in the environment of we're seeing on the studio side, I think the streamers are beginning to now reevaluate their business model in terms of how do they mix between original productions and licensed content, David. So we're even seeing that now get factored into the equation as well, just to make the world even more complicated.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? So when I was reading up about the potential merger, there was two things I came across that I wanted to put to you both. And it was, first of all, they were talking about what's the benefit to Warner Brothers Discovery, what's the benefit to Paramount. So if we just talk about, first of all, the Warner Brothers benefit. So obviously the big thing for them is they acquire a broadcast network in the US and CBS, which gives them access to the NFL rights overall, which is obviously a huge draw for audiences.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that I did not realize, and I'll just give you this statistic, and I'm taking this word for word, so if I'm wrong, I don't want anybody to kill me in the comments, but it says that CBS accounts for 1/3 of Paramount's overall audience demand. And it actually is 4% of US total demand in terms of audience viewing figures. And that's predominantly coming from their procedural dramas like NCIS, Criminal Minds, among others. And it says that actually, both of those properties are, among others in the CBS portfolio, are 4 of the top 6 in the Nielsen top 10 streaming figures on a weekly basis. So it would seem to me that Warner, obviously, you get a broadcast network, you get the NFL rights that CBS has, but then you also get some very big properties when it comes to your potential streaming platform as well.
Yeah, those shows are, first of all, you have to take everything with a grain of salt because you talk about broadcast network audience, which is probably 65 plus.
Right.
60, very old.
Right.
And CBS is the oldest of all the networks.
Right.
So I don't, it's worth something. There's the huge libraries of those, programs, those procedurals, which, like Law and Orders, you can kind of watch them over and over. But, yeah, sure. That's, sounds right enough. I don't know that that's a reason to merge. Stu could speak to this. The opportunity. One of the opportunities is sort of dominating the kids business and really challenging Disney with the combination of Cartoon Network,
and Nick,
and Nick, which Stu could talk a great deal about. Obviously,
I'm going to come on to that actually.
Yeah, there's some sport, obvious, the obvious sports synergies, which, you talked about. And look, the NFL is the only reason there's still broadcast television. So, without NFL football, there is no CBS, there is no NBC, there is no ABC. But then you get, there's the Paramount library combined with the Warner Brothers library. That's a big content library with a lot of great IP. So, some
Well, let's
theoretical.
talking about IP, Doug.
Well,
So just I wrote down some here. So from the Paramount side, you'd get Star Trek, you'd get the Terminator franchise, you get Transformers, Mission Impossible. This is just among the few I've put down. From the Warner Brothers Discovery side, you'd get the DC, superhero film library, the Harry Potter franchise, the Lord of the Rings franchise. I mean, there's a substantial amount of IP in there as well. So, it comes with potentially its benefits from a movie studio perspective.
Yeah. So, it's more.
more.
I don't know if it's better, but it's more. It's bigger. It's more. They, like I said, they've all got it doesn't solve any. I don't know if it solves any problem.
Yeah. I think more is more plus more is good. All right, but you still have to make the movies. You have to, just because you have the rights, you still then have to go and have the capital to go and make everything and launch these properties and get them
not
relaunched.
make really bad versions of them,
right?
Like
I mean,
look, Marvel suffered,
but by the way, look what's happening right now.
Marvel,
Marvel, the Aquaman is opening now, and you look at the reviews and you look at the kind of the deflation in terms of superhero movies right now. So more is, as Doug said, and Dave, as you said, yes, it's more. It still comes with a price to acquire that more, and then you have to have the capital to go and say pick the right properties to go make more stuff. I think a lot of this is about, besides these things, I think it's about how does a company stay in the content business and the distribution business and have the right infrastructure size for the size. So I think when you look at this in terms of merger, it's like, how do we get more? And I hate to say it because I think this would be the end result. How do we cut infrastructure out and costs out of the organization to lean?
That goes that saying. So
exactly, and
you have two similar organizations, which would become one.
One.
By the way, just there's going to be a lot of people out of work.
Exactly right,
and they'll run it more efficiently. That's for sure.
For sure,
that's his best subject.
Right, and so you're gonna have you're gonna put pressure on with less staff, less infrastructure, and yes, you'll have more options. The other thing, just to touch on what you said, David, about CBS and so forth, I still believe somewhere that this has been bandied about, and I shared this with you earlier, and this is just an element of what the benefits could be. You have two news organizations of CBS and CNN, and I can speak to when I was at Turner and Time Warner and so forth. We always had this. There was always discussion about how to play with CBS because it was sitting out there. It didn't have a robust cable proposition. Yet we did. We had CNN. So there's that looking, that glass lens to kind of go, oh, you got CNN, you got CBS. What do you do in terms of a news organization, of a merged organization on that front as a potential? And that's even before you get to the kids side. But yeah, more is more. But this is really about how do you get more for less of cost structure.
Of course.
Back to the IP and the franchise stuff. There's a lot of as Stu said, look at what's going on. It's people are beginning to tire of these legacy, even Transformers, that's now 20 years old.
Oh yeah,
maybe more. And that's the newest one. So what's not happening is new franchises are not getting developed because all these legacy media companies, particularly now, are just leaning on old familiar IP in an effort to save on marketing costs and bring an audience to something familiar. And look, I think that kind of lack of innovation is a big problem for these companies too, in developing new creative inspired IP for the next generation. But so we've seen this before, so it could very well happen, but it does, it's not a it doesn't feel on paper like a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing. It feels almost like a 1 + 1 = 1.5.
And it's already, Doug, it's already, as we've seen, it's already being discussed as, really, is this a 1 + 1 = 3? Is it really? And I think that even though the news is out about discussions, I'm not yet convinced that there won't be more players jumping in.
Yeah.
This usually creates a little bit of a frenzy.
Well,
And
Skydance, the studio was already sniffing around.
exactly.
I'm going to assume if you're Comcast, you're like, should we be taking a look at this? I'm sure they are, but whether they will officially, remains to be seen.
And it sparked the rumors about NBC and Warner's again.
Yeah, well,
that's right. I mean, but Comcast looking at CBS, but also bouncing in and saying, because there's all this buzz about Comcast spinning out NBC and merging and merging it with Warner.
Oh, I got
so there's all this stuff happening again. This is going to create another news cycle of M&A conversation. So, and let's not forget, the news of the last week is BET being spun out of
Viacom.
Viacom, right?
Well, that's been on the BET's been on. They've Tyler Perry. This couple of months ago,
Byron
Allen stepped up. I know some investors who are putting together.
Yep.
But
that's
they had talked about Showtime in the past, which in retrospect, maybe they should have.
Right.
So yeah, it's all look. The glass half empty folks amongst us would say just arranging decks on the Titanic here.
Exactly.
Because these are all troubled. They've all got a lot of
unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, talking about potential people that were looking to acquire it, Paramount. I was reading apparently Redbird Capital Partners, led by Jeff Zucker, are also very interested in potentially acquiring Paramount Global if it's available.
Well, let's confirm one thing from an assumption standpoint. It's available. Sorry, I'm not trying to be flip, but clearly there's enough noise about it at the right price.
The other interesting thing is whether it's just purely Paramount Global that's available, or it's a company, or national amusements.
Right.
And I suppose that would be another interesting conversation around, film studio ownership and actual, your distribution locations in terms of cinemas and theaters through national amusements. So there's an interesting. But look, I really want to touch on, Stu, a little bit about the real. So there is obviously a lot of speculation around the children's programming arm, and you're probably best to speak to this. And obviously, Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon are synonymous with children's entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, when I was talking about this with other people, I said when I was younger growing up, and you'll probably love this too, I always gravitated towards Cartoon Network rather than Nickelodeon. I don't know why that is. I just
I know. I have a feeling I know why, but go ahead.
But I guess the other interesting aspect that people are touching on is perhaps the ownership of children's programming is the real opportunity to compete in the streaming space as well. And it'd just be interesting to get your thoughts on, having led Cartoon Network, what maybe bringing Nickelodeon into that sector could mean.
Yeah, so I think that clearly the kid space, what it offers is legacy libraries. I mean, both companies have good, strong brand properties. Of course, on the Nickelodeon side, SpongeBob and others. I mean, but it's led by SpongeBob. Cartoon Network's got a whole bunch of brands as well, and for different eras. So I mean, both companies. You have Adult Swim sitting on the Cartoon Network side, so you have the adult animation as well, things like Rick and Morty. So and the beautiful thing about animation and the kids business is that every 5 years we thought of a new cycle of kids. You can run animation forever. And it's legacy. You don't have to worry about it appearing dated. So you have a library that has great use for a long time. So you can mine it as licensed property, either on your own networks or your own streaming service, or you could license it out across the globe. So there's no doubt about that. At the same time, the kids business has its own challenges, especially today. We were talking about legacy brands like Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network as cable networks. They're struggling. The advertising dollars are not quite what they once were. The viewership has moved over to streaming. So there's no doubt from a library perspective And the studios, you have Hanna-Barbera on the Warner Brothers side, you have Nickelodeon Studios, you have Warner Brothers Animation. There's no doubt there's content there and there's infrastructure there. It's just, how do you come out for today's generation of kids to make content that can get placed and can, earn revenue, because sub fees are down, advertising is down, and really the dollars for the kids business is licensing and merchandise.
Mm.
And if you have a hit property, pick one, whether it's SpongeBob or Paw Patrol or Peppa Pig or something like that, what I call these breakout hits. Then you have live tours, you have the sheets, the pillowcases, the toys, and so forth, and that's really the engines of the kids business.
I am going through this at the moment with my toddler, Stu, where we're going to live productions of the daily shows that I have to watch on CBeebies in the UK.
There you go.
But interestingly enough, in the UK, obviously the two leading brands here, BBC and ITV. ITV actually shuttered its children's television channel, CITV, and it is now a purely online and streaming service. Whereas obviously the BBC has continued to operate CBeebies. I mean, it's a completely different beast because it's license fee, structured. So they don't really have to concern themselves too much with perhaps.
But that is a real situation. I mean, I think the statistics that I am very, the last one I heard was the kids' viewing patterns in the States on the cable networks are down 60 to 75% to what they were 5 years ago. I mean, and it's not getting any better. So you have
it's never coming back.
It's never coming back. It's not getting better.
Versus, our kids, who grew up on basic cable television, right? And by the way, will never be basic cable subscribers. This generation is growing up on YouTube and TikTok, and Netflix, and a whole different array of content choices and platforms. I mean, this is this is the little bit like the last gasp of legacy media as we knew it, because it's it's just never going. The TV business is headed in a completely different direction. It's been turned on its head.
There was
that being said, I don't think anybody knows exactly where it's going.
Right,
but it'll be the same.
It's as fragmented as it's ever been, and just going back to the kids side. There was a day when there was a very steady $750 to $1 billion of kids ad revenue, David, that was available, that we used to split with Nickelodeon, we would split it with Disney and so forth. That money right now is completely off the cable networks, or it's a slither of that, of it's a budget. Number one is a budget, because I don't believe the number is that large anymore. And then the other side of it is, from a standpoint, it's fragmented. So how does that happen? How do you reinvent, or how do you really create it for today's kids who are watching on multiple platforms?
Right. So, and the truth is, these brands, great brands, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, world-class brands, they're not what they were. And, their value and, sort of decreases every day as a younger generation, is, involved, on other platforms, including video games. Some of the sort of, like the SpongeBob, like the really strong, IP within those brands, I think, will continue to thrive and survive, maybe on different platforms. But like the value of like slapping Nickelodeon on something, or slapping cartoon, I remember my kid, I remember coming home from work, 25 years ago, close to 30 actually. And, I was, just me and my only son at the time, and I turn on the TV and I put him in front, and I turn on Looney Tunes. And, this is how strong the branding was back then. So Looney Tunes, you'll remember this, Stu, were shared for a while, right? Half the library was Turner, half the library was on Nickelodeon.
Yeah.
And I turn on Turner Looney Tunes, and he says to me, "I don't want to watch this." And I say, "Well, you love Looney Tunes." And he says, "Yeah, but it's not on Nickelodeon."
There you go.
and the power of these brands, which was so, I mean, Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, MTV, they're powerful, powerful brands with brand meant everything. And the reason you showed up to watch, that's all gone.
All gone.
All gone.
All gone.
Although, I think, as all this consolidation continues, and there'd be these big mega streamers, which to me are a little bit like like big department stores, Walmart, Kmart, Walgreens, they have everything you want. They're almost like the old broadcast networks, trying to be all things to all people. I think that opens the door for smaller, more targeted, more focused, branded services that have the ability to give sort of television viewers what they want and let them know they can come there for what they want.
Yeah.
It's very hard to, Netflix has got everything, but is it like really for you? Right. Do they, I think, so I don't know. I think there's an opportunity there. We'll see how it all shakes out.
Well, I think that's kind of a little bit what David Zaslav talked about when they went through the original Reverse Morris Trust between Warner Brothers and Discovery, where he was effectively saying that it's almost taking the properties that they have and hyper putting them into the audiences that would be interested in that particular property. You look at the Food Network, it still has a kind of strong audience for people who are really into food and cooking, etc. It's almost like what he was trying to talk about was, how do we take narrowcasting to the next generation and bring people directly to the type of content that they would want. But I mean, I'm just going to touch on two more things before we'll kind of finish up. But I mean, it seems to me like from a TV property perspective, there are a lot of brands that kind of cross over the same. You look at HBO or Showtime, fairly similar, sort of histories there. You've got your, we've talked about Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. We've talked about potentially the likes. I appreciate these are slightly different, and forgive me because I'm sure maybe some US commenters might kill me for my comparisons of these properties. But Comedy Central, maybe Adult Swim. There's a link, there in terms
absolutely.
of the content.
Absolutely.
The Smithsonian Channel and Discovery, are broadly similar, sort of documentary, natural content. So it seems to me like there's, as you really talked about, there is going to be consolidation. But does that necessarily mean that those properties, I guess, in your view, would a Nickelodeon and a Cartoon Network stay as, viable brands on their own, or do you simply just try and merge them in some sort of new format?
Well, there could be a new kids platform, a new kids, what I call presentation. You don't have to do away with brands. You could still, I do believe that the brands are still somewhat resonant in regards to connecting. So you don't, in my opinion, you don't throw them out. But there could be a new kids proposition to take out to the marketplace, which is, I think, Doug, as we shared, very focused and very singular. You want kids programming, you're a kid, you can do that.
Yeah. And there's a million ways to do it.
Ways to do it.
You can build a hub, you could shove it into it. But the important thing, which Stu talked about earlier, is probably where the value comes is in, you had a sales force selling Adult Swim, you had a sales force selling Central. Now you have one sales force selling them both. So there's just an efficiency there, right? In a lot of different ways, right? You now own the marketplace, right? For that type of programming, and you have one sales force rather than two competing against each other, trying to sell it. So yeah, there's there's something there.
There's something there.
I don't think it wins the game. Because I mean, with all due respect, I couldn't, you're not gonna find anybody who's more prouder of Comedy Central and its legacy than me. But it doesn't matter anymore. It just doesn't. It mattered tremendously to my kids who were the audience at the time, but the 20 somethings of today, not so much. I don't think.
Well, you have to.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, Stu, Doug, I'm even thinking about the people who've went from the likes of Comedy Central, like the John Olivers, that have gone to HBO now, and the potential, very similar.
And even HBO, like talk about, I mean, we could discuss how that's been handled in the, in the new
Right.
Warner Bros. Discovery universe. It's just not, and that I look at as purely a consumer. I'm just a fan, right? I never, and it's not the same. It's lost something, and I don't know how they get it back necessarily. So that's what that's what I talk about, sort of like the big box mentality of these, streamers, which is like, just get everything and make sure we have everything and make sure everybody comes here. And I get it. I mean, that works. But I do think there is a consumer who wants a different experience.
I think it only works to a certain segment of the audience and the market. There's a whole market out there that's still, very focused on what I call very, very focused brands or subject matters and so forth. So kids or documentaries and so forth. Yes, you can go to some segment of the market, or the viewer is going to go to the mall. Let's use the mall as that example. And then others say, you know what? I know I want this type of show or this type of, how do I find that? And that's where I stay.
How do I find what I want?
And I want to stay there. I want to
exactly.
mine.
I want to be with my people. I want to be with my shows. I want to, right. That doesn't exist anymore.
That doesn't exist. And I think that creates opportunity.
I've been thinking about Comedy Central, and like, if Paramount were to, somebody approached them and wanted to spin that out, and, what would that be? And, I really started thinking about it a lot. So, the at the heart of Comedy Central was discovering new talent. So stand-up comics, right? So you find this person, you give them 5 minutes on a show, then you give them 10 minutes on the show, then you get them on the roast, and then you develop a show with, there was a whole path, So Amy Schumer, Dave Chappelle, Jon Stewart. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, right? The people we were able to develop. I don't know that as a platform that exists anymore, because stand-ups now, TikTok and YouTube and Instagram,
right,
and they can develop their own audiences on a platform where they have a lot more control. And they're never going back. They don't need TV anymore. And they are selling. I mean, the stand-up comedy business is out of control, huge now. I mean, you have, comics that I would have, considered B pluses, 5 years ago, are selling out arenas all over the world. It's now become a global business where it wasn't, also previously. So I think even the model of Comedy Central, like, I don't know that it's a brand with some equity left, but not a ton. And every day they let it wither, it gets less valuable. And that goes from all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm going to ask you 2 questions to kind of finish up. So I'll ask the first one. And you may tell me that this is not really an important question, but I thought it would be useful to ask, is what do you think this means for the legacies of the people like the Ted Turners, the Sumner Redstones, the Rosses, etc., that built up these companies? Do you think there's still something there, or do you think that legacy is kind of done with and media just needs to move on into a new era?
I want to make sure I understand the question. You mean of their personal legacies?
I think more the legacies of what they built as a company and a brand.
Oh, that's an easy one for me. Legacies, it takes nothing that's happening today takes away from their legacies of what the companies and the visions of what they created. Everything happens in its own time, right? Businesses evolve and change over time. What they created, whether it is Sumner or Ted, and you can go on, what they created, they were visionaries of where the business was going, and they had the wherewithal, they had the stamina, they had the vision to make it happen. So I think it takes nothing away from the legacies. I had the honor of working for Ted, and I will also throw in Vince McMahon as a visionary of what he created.
Vince is different because Vince is still in it, still relevant,
exactly,
and still evolving.
Correct. So, and he evolved exactly.
I totally agree with Stu, but it's like anything else. It's like talking about Louis B. Mayer or William Paley, or these, whoever it was. There are people who built and moved their industries forward in their time, and that they'll always have that, but it continues to evolve and move on. So the movie business today is not Louis B. Mayer's business, and the TV today is not Ted Turner's business.
And we're going to have, and we have now new visionaries and new people with their legacies on the technology side. And we can most probably spend another hour on that and what the ramifications of what that's going to look like.
Yeah, the question is, so in 20 years, we'll be talking about Ted Sarandos and his legacy.
Right. Reed and Elon Musk and
whoever it is,
Exactly.
But these, that doesn't change. The folks who, built these, industries, that's there forever. But time marches on, and the game isn't the same.
Right.
Yeah. Well, look, last question for me, and thank you both for your time in discussing this. But if you were in the position to advise David Zaslav if he was looking to do a merger, would you be positive or negative about the potential properties? Or, feel free to even take a neutral stance if you think there are positives and negatives. Stu, I'll go to you first.
I think in this day and age that we're living in, this is going to sound crude, but I'll try and pay it off for you. I think everybody is looking for more ammunition. They're looking for more content, more brands, more stuff. But they need to do it with less. And that goes back to that conversation of we need more to drive revenue and to drive properties and to create content, but we need to do it with the same amount of people that we had for one company, not two companies. So, how do you cut out a whole, half an organization from an efficiency standpoint? The big factor for me still comes down to cost and debt, which is really the driver. I mean, if you look at what these things are costing, and time will tell in terms of whether these things pay off. Sometimes bigger or larger is not the answer because of what you have to carry as debt on these deals. So to me, yes, this is absolutely the era right now, this moment in time in the next 24 months. And I think it even started before right now of mergers. There are going to be M&As, there are going to be combinations that are happening left and right. There'll be cost cutting. There'll be more people laid off. There will be a lot of that happening. But if I was advising, I'd sit there and go, still, what's the price of doing this? And what's the debt load that these companies are going to be carrying? Because there's no guarantee of success in today's world.
Absolutely. And Doug, same question for you.
I don't disagree with anything that Stu said. And I would take more of a neutral approach. I don't know the answer. I don't know that anybody does. So, you got to do something if you're these companies, because sitting in one place will get you run over at some point. I think Paramount's getting pretty close. And I don't know. I take a little bit more of I'll go on the other side of the coin, and take a softer approach. I think Wall Street has become the godhead for the entertainment business, where it didn't used to be. Rupert Murdoch never looked at the stock price, back in the heyday of Fox. While everybody's desire for greater data and analytics, which are great tools, look, they called it movie magic for a reason. It's not a formula. You can't put it on paper. I'm a big believer in, the studios, the platforms, the networks with the best ideas and the best people win. And I think they're getting away from that a little bit. I'm a big believer in great ideas and great people. I think, that's not the biggest priority these days for some of these companies.
Well, thank you, Doug, Stu, and hopefully this has been beneficial for anybody that's chose to watch it. Feel free to add some comments to what we've talked about today, and I appreciate Doug, Stu, you giving your time and your expertise in both of these businesses in this sector. And we're very lucky to have both of you on our advisory board here at Psyched4. So thank you both.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Pleasure.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays.